Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to absolutely dismantle a massive pop culture myth. For decades now, Sylvia Plath's legacy has been weighed down by these heavy caricatures, usually reducing her to nothing more than a tragic, helpless victim. But over the next few minutes, we're flipping the script. We're going to look at the hard evidence and uncover the incredibly brilliant, disciplined creator behind all those cliches. We are talking about a vibrant life and some seriously blazing art. So let's just dive right in and ask ourselves a fundamental question. Who was the real Sylvia Plath? Does that tragic, death-obsessed figure we constantly see in movies and the media, the so-called Marilyn Monroe of the literati, does that actually represent the real woman? Well, as we dig into the historical record, it becomes crystal clear that the popular narrative has gotten her completely wrong.
To really grasp the environment she was up against, picture this. It's 1955. Plath is graduating from Smith College, and presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson tells her brilliantly educated class that their highest calling in life is the kitchen. He literally said, once they wrote poetry, now it's the laundry list. I mean, wow, right? That was the suffocating sexism in the brutal 1950s glass ceiling Plath was fighting against. She wanted to be a writer, a wife, and a mother in an era that completely scoffed at female artistic ambition.
We really absolutely have to separate this whole melodramatic, mad woman in the attic caricature from the reality of a fiercely determined, trailblazing writer. The myth paints her as this tragic spectacle, but the historical reality? Plath was a total academic superstar. She was accepted to graduate programs at Columbia, Oxford, and Radcliffe. She was incredibly ambitious and an intensely disciplined craftswoman who studied literature's greatest minds just so she could forge her own unique path.
You can practically feel her intense drive in this journal entry. Inspired by Henry James's story, The Beast in the Jungle, Plath wrote about her deep, deep fear of missing out on life's profound experiences. She absolutely dreaded a passionless, neutral existence. Far from swooning into darkness, she was voracious for life and experience. She wanted to write, travel, cook, and love with an operatic intensity.
Moving on to Section 1. A creative, tragic marriage. Look, we usually only hear the tabloid version of her marriage to Ted Hughes, the tragic end. But their partnership was actually a powerhouse of creative energy. Hughes called it a poetic folie à deux. They plundered each other merrily, co-creating a surprisingly progressive working marriage for that time. Plath acted as Hughes's agent. She typed his manuscripts, managed his finances, sent out his submissions. In turn, he pushed her to concentrate on her deepest consciousness. They shared this raw aesthetic vision and pushed each other way past the polite, destructive, poetic gentility of the era.
And Plath's genius wasn't just some magic lightning bolt or a passive pouring out of emotion. It was a rigorous, daily wrestling match with her craft. As she actually told her mother, you have to earn the name of writer over again every single day. Even Hughes later acknowledged that he owed a massive part of his early literary career to her relentless ambition and drive.
All right, part 2, the real Otto Plath. If you've ever read her famous poem Daddy, you probably picture Otto Plath as this terrifying patriarchal tyrant and a fascist. But reality check, the historical facts completely shatter that literal interpretation. Otto wasn't an oppressor at all. He was a committed pacifist, a secular humanist, and a German-American immigrant who actually renounced his German citizenship and watched Hitler's rise with deep, deep trepidation.
When you trace Otto's turbulent journey from a 15-year-old immigrant to a Harvard scientist, you uncover a path of profound struggle. He actually defied his family to leave the Lutheran seminary in 1910 because he wanted to pursue science. He endured intense scrutiny during World War I and finally earned his Harvard doctorate in 1928. It's a life defined by immense struggle and incredible moral stamina.
And it gets wilder. The details of his 1918 FBI investigation reveal the really dark reality of his American experience. Thanks to the massive anti-German paranoia of World War I, Otto was reported for alleged pro-German sympathies. Here was an alien working menial jobs for 20 cents an hour, deeply in debt, and he was even fired from a grocery store just for not buying Liberty bonds. He was ultimately cleared, but the whole ordeal reveals him as a marginalized immigrant, not some terrifying tyrant.
First-hand accounts completely contradict the myth too. Thomas Clohesi, who was a former student of his at Boston University, explicitly noted that Otto was certainly not the ogre that the poem thinks he was. Students actually remembered him as a kind, talkative, and gentle mentor. The imposing, scary figure in Sylvia's mythology? That was a literary construct she built for her art, completely separate from the real man.
Get this number for a second. 250. That is the number of bumblebee colonies Otto discovered at Harvard's Bussey Institution over 13 years. Think about that. It perfectly captures his true passion. He was a meticulous, gentle entomologist, a man totally obsessed with the wonders of nature, rather than the dark, political conquest depicted in all those pop culture analyses of Plath's poetry.
Which brings us to Section 3, generational trauma.
Now, to really understand Sylvia's deep-seated fears about mental health, we have to talk about a pretty harrowing family secret. Her grandmother, Ernestine Plath, died forgotten in an Oregon insane asylum back in 1919. What's truly heartbreaking here is that Sylvia herself never knew the full truth, that her grandmother died of tuberculosis in an asylum, and that her ashes literally sat forgotten on a dark basement shelf in a copper canister for nearly a century.
When you put that dark family history next to her own horrific experiences, her absolute terror of hospitals becomes tragically logical. She was terrified of 1950s psychiatric negligence, especially after enduring botched, torturous electroshock therapy in 1953. She lived in deep, very real fear of lobotomies and forced institutionalization. Knowing all this context, it's sadly no accident that she chose suicide on the exact day she was supposed to enter a psychiatric ward.
Let's bring it all together in our final section, Reclaiming the Red Comet.
It is high time we focus on what Plath gave to the world rather than what she gave up. Her late poetry and her absolutely phenomenal novel The Bell Jar weren't just journals of personal despair. They served as profound protest literature for the disenfranchised. Far from just swooning into darkness, she bravely explored the cold, hard reality of depression and forcefully questioned whether society's oppressive, sexist rules were what actually drove people crazy in the first place. I mean, just look at this powerful, fiery directive from her 1958 journal. Be right or wrong, don't be indifferent, don't be nothing. She absolutely refused to be paralyzed by neutrality. She didn't want to just fade away. She demanded an active, passionate existence and poured every ounce of that fiery energy directly into her work. Her true legacy is right there in her own words. Now she is flying, more terrible than she ever was. Red scar in the sky, red comet. Plath was a blazing, triumphant creator rising from the ashes. She completely mastered her literary tradition, reading everyone from Chaucer to Eliot, just so she could shatter it and forge something entirely new, flying much higher than anyone ever expected.
So this leaves us with a huge, provocative question. How should we choose to remember our female geniuses? Ultimately, are we going to keep chaining Sylvia Plath to the sensationalized death machine, forever reducing her to a pop culture cliché? Or are we going to finally look at the evidence, actually read her words, and recognize her as the triumphant, trailblazing architect of modern poetry she truly was? The choice is ours. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.